vraiment un plaisir d'être parmi vous. My name is Caro Loutfi, and I'm a millennial. Like many people my age, I was following a pretty conventional path. I was finishing my undergraduate degree in the arts and waitressing part-time when I took on an internship at a nonprofit called Apathy Is Boring. A year and a half later, I became the executive director of this national organization. That was somewhat less conventional for a 24-year-old woman, but made possible because I was given the platform as well as the tools to have my voice heard in a way it had never been heard before. I'm going to talk to you today about building a more inclusive and responsive democracy, which is in the DNA of Apathy Is Boring. We are an organization working to support our peers in being active and contributing citizens. So 2017 and Canada 150 shouldn't be so much about a celebration, but instead a turning point for our democracy. Let's start with a little bit of context. If we zoom out for a second and compare ourselves globally, especially right now, we're doing a pretty good job. We've been ranked the #2 best country in the world 2 times in a row, according to the latest World Report. This looks at countries based on our politics, the economy, and quality of life. But however well we may be ranked, we know that we face challenges in our communities. Whether it's increasingly visible Islamophobia, take the shooting at the mosque in Quebec City, for example, or missing and murdered Indigenous women, or the challenges we face with climate change, and I can keep going. As a society, we will continue to face challenges and inequalities will arise. So take a moment to think about this. In 150 years from now, not one person currently living on planet Earth will be here. It will be a world populated entirely by different people. Now think back 150 years ago. No one who's here today was around back then, but the decisions that they made, our policies, our systems of governance, continue to have an impact on us today, both the good and the bad, but their voices are still being heard. It's these collective decisions made by our society today that will have a profound impact on our future. And democracy is the process by which all of these voices are heard and then transitioned into action. I like to think of it as my dinner table conversations growing up. These discussions and debates, sometimes heated, which included on one side my father, who immigrated to Canada during the Civil War in Lebanon, my Caucasian mother, who was born and raised in rural Japan, and me and my brothers, who learned about history from a French-Canadian Québécois perspective. Canada's millennials are the most multicultural generation in our country's history. Not only that, but we live in a more globalized and complex world today. Our democracy needs to keep up, and we should challenge the assumptions that democratic institutions built to hear us are actually also listening. Government is branded to bore us. And voter turnout stats show that that's working. This year, half of millennials said that they were not interested in politics. Only 1 in 4 have been actively engaged in a cause. But what's of even greater concern is that civic engagement behavior is formed when you're young. So for example, whether or not you will become a lifelong voter is determined based on how you act in those first 2 elections in which you're eligible to vote. And it's not that millennials are not aware or even passionate about social justice issues and challenges. It's a question of action, how we choose to have our voice heard, and who's on the other side listening. If we want to have structural, lasting change, we need to engage with the structures themselves. So this past September, I went back to Dawson College for the 10-year anniversary of the school shooting, which resulted in 1 death and 19 serious injuries. It was my first semester at Dawson, and I'll always remember that day and those events vividly. So I went back to be part of this anniversary. And while I was there, I heard the story of a former student who had been shot that day and has since spent the last years pushing gun reform laws in Quebec. She was persistent in having her voice heard and is part of the reason the Quebec government passed Bill 64 this past summer, a piece of legislation that requires all firearms in the province to have a serial number and be inscribed in a database. This is just one example of the power we can have when we include dialogue with government among our tools to create change. But we don't want a democracy that just hears from young people out of moments of despair and frustration. Imagine the country we could have if our democracy heard from all of us, all of the time. To quote fellow Montrealer, Charles Taylor, "Democracy is a collective effort with a noble goal of inclusion." So then how do we build a more inclusive and responsive democracy? First, government needs to listen. Canadian democracy is not built to hear from us in between elections. We should demand that our governments at all levels invest in communications. We need two-way channels that allow for feedback loops and conversations to evolve. A non-responsive government leads to disengagement. And as much as I love selfies, they just don't respond. Second, we need youth to speak up. Everyone should feel capable of talking politics. It's on all of us in this room to make that possible. We need to dress down democracy. Take off the suits, put down the briefcases, bring it back down to the individual and that dinner table conversation. Recognize the influence of government and politics in everyday life situations and talk about it. Third, we need the process itself to be inclusive. Think about who's not in the room, who's not showing up and why. Our system was built to shut out certain voices, mainly our most vulnerable populations. Find an organization that works to address these challenges and advocate alongside them. If we use this opportunity to take back our power, then we'll build the foundation for this new way of thinking, that government works for us and not the other way around. A democracy that lives, breathes, and adapts to its citizens' needs and desires is the best legacy we can leave for all of those new people that will be here in 150 years from now. Thank you.